The year has just begun and it's time for my first video of 2020, so I decided to go for a very relaxing start. My lore videos are a lot about sharing my passion for Tolkien's works and what I have learned while doing research on a topic. Every time I make a video, I learn something new or relearn something I forgot again, and I hope that my viewers do too when watching my videos. So my idea, why not looking back at some unusual things I learned or relearned in 2019 about Tolkien's world that really stood out or surprised me. If you have seen all my videos, you will probably remember some of those points, but some of them were also not mentioned in any of my videos so far, so it should be interesting for everyone. Also, as always, I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it. Shoutouts to Niati, Benev, Kimberly80 and Min for allowing me to use their amazing artworks, and spoiler warning. Let's start in no particular order. Number 1. In the Hobbit book, we find a note that the Elven King loved the strong wine from a place called Dorwinion. Quote, "The wine of Dorwinion brings deep and pleasant dreams." And it must be potent wine to make a wood elf drowsy, but this wine, it would seem, was the heady vintage of the great gardens of Dorwinion, not meant for his soldiers. I think it was Gilgair from my community who brought the name Dorwinion back to my mind during a stream. However, what's most interesting about Dorwinion is its potential location. According to the history of the Hobbit book, Dorwinion was probably far south down the river Running. This would leave us close to or in Rhûn, which was Easterling territory at this time. It can be assumed that many Easterling tribes were allies of Sauron. Considering all this, it's quite interesting that Tharnduil imported wine from there and that it was still possible to have trade relations to this region or a region close to it at the time of The Hobbit. A connection to the efforts of the two Blue Wizards who traveled the far eastern regions seemed unlikely to me because Tolkien decided them succeeding in the east in his late writings from around 1970. Of course, it must also be mentioned that at the time Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, the territories of his world were not very defined yet. All this could also have another connection. In the region where the wine is from could have lived the kine of Arau, which are mentioned in The Lord of the Rings and were hunted by the Gondorian steward Vorondil, who is the father of the first ruling steward, so an ancestor of Denethor II from The Lord of the Rings. Arau is the Sindari name of Orome, the huntsman of the Valar, so basically the god or high angel of hunting. It was believed that those kine were related to him like Meras, which made them special. Vorondil took a horn from them and formed the Great Horn, which became an important heirloom of the stewards of Gondor. In The Lord of the Rings, we see Boromir carrying it, and it being split into two parts has of course special meaning, foreshadowing the end of the era of the ruling stewards. We can also read in The Lord of the Rings, quote, that if it be blown at need anywhere within the bounds of Gondor, as the realm was of old, its voice will not pass unheeded, which gives Boromir using the horn a lot of depth. This information here is also foreshadowing what you will hear in a future films and books, references and differences video, and is another instance of how well Tolkien connected details in his world. Number 2. Researching and trying to pronounce names as Tolkien probably intended them to be pronounced, or as it makes sense considering their etymology, is a big part in all my lore videos, but sometimes I mess up or say it wrong. Getting the stress of a name right can be very difficult, especially if you are in addition speaking in a language that is not your native one. So last year I tried to reduce some mistakes I often do. For example, now I try to say Teleri instead of Teleri, Istari instead of Istari, and so on. Also, I often do another mistake, using the plural of a name when it should be singular. For example, he is a Dunedain is wrong, but he is a Dunadan would be right. It should be Gandalf is an Istar and not Gandalf is an Istari. Also, Shadowfax is a Meras is wrong. Meras means horses and is plural. It should be Shadowfax is a Merch, which can be hard to say. In addition, it's to Teleri, one Teler, to Noldor, one Noldor, and so on. Funnily enough, I knew the singular forms before, but still often make this mistake. I assume because some singular forms are used so rarely and during production often many other things are on my mind, so I just get blind for seeing mistakes like these. There are also some weird cases I'm a bit indifferent about. The books exclusively use Balrogs as plural, which is clearly anglicized. The name Balrog is however Sindarin, and Tolkien uses the Sindarin plural for Sindarin words in his books too. For example, Emunbereit, which are the Tower Hills, where one Palantir is kept. The singular of Emun would be Amon, as we see in Amon Sul. It's not Amonsbereit. As we also see in this example, in Sindarin the vowels change to form the plural, like goose becomes geese in English. In my native language we find that too, but of course it's present in a lot of other languages too. So if we look at what we know, the plural of Balrog should be Belrug. However, I could not find a single instance in the books where this form is used. That's why I always go with Balrogs in my videos. As mentioned, it seems that the plurals of Sindarin and Quenya names are usually not anglicized in the books, like Istari, Palantiri, Edain, and so on. A similar exception we find with the word Silmaril. Usually we see the anglicized plural Silmarils instead of the Quenya plural Silmarilli, which is strange too. However, the form Silmarilli appears several times too in Tolkien's books, even in the Silmarillion, so here I usually go with the Quenya plural. Number 3. Remember the scene in the films when Sam kicks in the door to help his friend Frodo, who was kidnapped by this stranger called Strider? In the English version, he calls him Longshanks. This scene is completely different in the books, but there, a bit later, when the hobbits leave Bree with Strider, Bill Ferny calls Strider Longshanks too, and Sam throws an apple after Ferny, hitting his head. So this name of Strider made it into the film too, just told a bit differently. Always impressive how many little references are hidden in the films. However, why Longshanks? In our history, there is also a king who had this nickname, Edward I, King of England, who ruled from 1272 until 1307. So Longshanks probably references that king from the real world's history. There was also the kingdom of Aragorn, which played a part in the history of Edward Longshanks, and he also restored the royal authority in England, which is a bit similar to what Aragorn does in Gondor. I also found an article on how Strider has parallels to Edward the Confessor, an Anglo-Saxon king, and also some others. Sadly, I'm not too familiar with the history of those kings, but Tolkien definitely was, and I think it's an interesting reference that not many people will even notice, and I only learned about it last year. Number 4. I never really noticed how important Weathertop was in Middle-earth's history since the last alliance. We discussed this in my last lore video about Weathertop, which I fully recommend watching. Weathertop was the place where the armies of the Noldor elves under High King Gil-galad and the Dún-Edain of Arnor under King Elendil met to march together to Gondor and then to Mordor as the legendary last alliance of elves and men, bringing Sauron close to his end. Later in the war between Angmar and Arnor, Mordor took revenge and the Witch King and his forces burnt Weathertop, or Amon Sul as it's called in Sindarin, down, also slaying the king. And much later it was also here where Aragorn, a descendant of the kings of Arnor, defended Weathertop against the Witch King and the Nazgûl again, protecting Frodo as good as he could, even though in the book the details are a bit different. And from here they marched to Rivendell and then down south to Gondor and Mordor like the last alliance once. Considering these parallels, this scene becomes really powerful in my eyes, and I never fully noticed all the similarities before doing research for the Weathertop video. Number 5. During research for this video, I noticed a passage regarding the Witch King of Angmar and his war against Arnor from Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings that I had totally forgotten. It was at this time that the Stoors that had dwelt in the angle between Horwell and Loudwater fled west and south because of the wars and the dread of Angmar, and because the land and climate of Eriador, especially in the east, worsened and became unfriendly. Some returned to wilder land and dwelt beside the Gledden, becoming a riverside people of fishers. I think this is a truly amazing lore detail. While the Witch King of Angmar destroyed the remains of Arnor, he unleashed an event that would ultimately change the history of Middle-earth, but not in his favor. The Stoor Hobbits fled from the war and moved by chance or purpose exactly to the location where the One Ring was once lost. And as we all know, a Stoor Hobbit called Deachol, to use the Old English pronunciation, found it, and his friend Smeagol killed him and became known as Gollum. With this, neither Sauron nor Saruman could find it later in the Gledden Fields, even though both knew the lore. Saruman found Isildur's corpse, the Star of Elendil, even the chain of the One Ring, but not what he searched for. If the Witch King would have reduced his war efforts in the north, either Sauron or Saruman could have found it there instead, and the story would be a very different one. What is also interesting, while the Nazgûl left Mordor to search for Baggins and Shire, they initially thought the Shire was somewhere around the Gledden Fields, because that's where Gollum was from, but they only found the villages of the Stoor Hobbits there, which were already abandoned for probably centuries. The existence of this village was, however, the result of the Witch King himself, and he had to leave it empty-handed. It's such a beautiful irony of fate. Number 6. I made a video about technology in the Lord of the Rings universe. I was asked 2018 to make a video like this in the comments, and it was on my mind for a long time. I think in early 2019 I looked a bit further into it to find out if there's enough material for a video, and I stumbled upon some hints in the book The Lost Road and other writings. It seems in early drafts of Tolkien, the advanced Dúnedain kingdom of Númenor was even more advanced than what we see in the final books later. In the draft, they were already in an era of steam machines. It's described that they had metal ships that needed no sails, and that they even had ships that traveled above the water, so basically airships, which was really surprising for me when I first read it. However, Tolkien abandoned this idea and thought that he could portray the Númenorians as advanced enough without giving them this technology. Still, it's an interesting thought having airships in this fantasy world. Of course, with Vingilote, the ship of Eärendil, that's Elrond's father, there is at least one flying ship in the lore. Tolkien was an important influence when it comes to the fantasy genre. He basically founded the high fantasy subgenre. And if he would have went this route further, maybe he would have even influenced or started the steampunk genre too. His creativity and ideas were really impressive, and his influence was vast on future generations of artists nonetheless. And last, number 7. This is again just a very small detail, but when it comes to Tolkien, for me his love of little details is what probably fascinates me most about his works, and how he manages to connect everything coherently. When Aragorn becomes king, he fulfills a prophecy we find in Tolkien's notes. Gandalf gave Galadriel the Elfstone called the Elessar, and prophesied that she would not keep it long and would give it to someone with the same name. She of course gave it to Aragorn, who becomes King Elessar, and with this having the same name. But there is another detail here that I totally forgot and rediscovered last year, even though it's clearly stated in the story of the Lord of the Rings. King Elessar founds a new house for his line, called the House of Telcontar. Telcontar is Quenya and means strider. I really love that Aragorn keeps his past as disliked and mysterious outcast in the north, where people called him Strider, and that it becomes the name of his royal house, the House of Strider. It makes Aragorn even more likable, at least for me. Again, Tolkien connected future and past events in a powerful way and created depth in his story with it. And through this, I guess, we always can discover new details in his world, even though we are already exploring it for years. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a light start into the new year, but don't worry, I will continue with my very detailed films and books references and differences series, which I also recommend checking out. I will also work on my Games of the Decade video and prepare more things in the background. I assume Amazon will also drop some news this year regarding their Lord of the Rings related series, which I will cover on this channel too. So far, we only have a lot of rumors. If you are looking for more, there are a lot in-depth lore videos available on my channel. Playlists are in the description. If you liked this video and want to support my channel, feel free to press the like button, leave a comment and recommend me further. In case you want to subscribe, consider pressing the annoying bell. Beyond that, you can follow me on Twitter. I often post news and rumors about Amazon's Lord of the Rings related series there. I also have a Discord server and stream on Twitch at times. Links are in the description. Again, thank you for watching. I wish you all a great new year 2020 and goodbye.